Picture in your mind a city, or just look at this one here on the screen. Now imagine a dark black cloud rolling over that city, covering it with a thick dust. That's what happened in the US and in Great Britain when they industrialized, and other newly industrializing countries are ready to follow in suit. These newly industrializing nations have the ability to avoid the mistakes that were made by the first countries to industrialize, and can avoid irreversible damage to the environment. However, one criticism has been that these nations do not have the funds available to finance such an industrialization using clean energy. But, in the long run, clean energy proves to be worlds better than fossil fuels in efficiency and more cost effective. Very little change has actually been made in how we create our energy since the first industrialization. Energy is still primarily created by heating a fossil fuel and using that to boil water. That vapor then spins turbines, which creates mechanical energy that powers everything we use today. If we're focusing on energy in the newly industrialized world, it would only make sense to focus on BRICS. No, not that kind. BRICS that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These nations are among the newliest industrialized. The first energy we're going to focus on is coal. Coal powered our industrialization and is in fact the worst fossil fuel out there. It burns very dirty and leaves behind the soot that covered cities in the early industrialization. Coal does this because it picks up other impurities and then releases them when it is burned. One nation that is heavily dependent on coal for its industrialization is China. China exports a large portion of its coal from the United States and has become a major trading partner with us in that aspect. South Africa is also heavily reliant on coal for their industrialization. They have the 7th largest coal reserves in the world, and they have very little oil. Speaking of oil, that is our next fossil fuel. Oil is what we depend on in the US for the majority of our energy, and it is also powering one country's industrialization. Russia has very large oil reserves and uses oil not only to power its industrialization, but as its major export to power its economy as well. The environmental issues with oil, however, are well documented, and we know what the risks are. Next up, and our first clean energy, is nuclear energy. That stuff you see billowing from the top is just water vapor, with occasionally some radioactive elements mixed in, but don't worry about that. India, with the world's 2nd largest population, has chosen to use nuclear power as its main source of energy for its industrialization. Although relatively clean, nuclear power also has its shortcomings. First of all, it isn't very efficient, and to power a nation the size of the US would require over 50 new nuclear power plants being built every year for the next 5 decades. Plus, the only way we've discovered to dispose of the nuclear waste created by this power plants is burying it deep underground in deserts. Biofuels are much cleaner burning than fossil fuels and are growing in popularity. For instance, in the US, we primarily use corn to create ethanol. Corn, however, does not even come close to stacking up against sugarcane in the world of biofuels. Sugarcane produces 8 units of energy for every 1 unit of petroleum used to create it, while corn only creates 1.3 units of energy for every 1 unit of petroleum used to create it. Not surprisingly, Brazil, with its large number of sugarcane fields, has decided to focus on biofuels for its primary source of energy in its industrialization. Biofuels utilize the stored sugars in plants to create fuels such as ethanol. Ethanol is much cleaner burning than fossil fuels with much smaller emissions. Biofuels also have much further to go, with advancements being made in biomass conversion into ethanol, which can yield up to 10 units of energy for every 1 unit of petroleum used in its creation. There are a number of alternatives for nations still utilizing fossil fuel. For instance, ones with coastlines can utilize the power of waves for free with just a small investment in the infrastructure. An alternative energy source available to every nation is the sun. Solar panels can be very powerful, and in fact, just 10,000 square miles of solar panels, that's 1/10 the size of Nevada, can power the entire United States. The same can be said for wind power. wind is available to all nations, and in fact, the same size area of wind turbines empower the United States. For extremely warm countries such as those in Africa, concentrated solar energy is an extremely viable alternative. It uses mirrors to focus on synthetic oil running through a tube. This oil gets heated to over 200 degrees Celsius and then is used to vaporize water to spin turbines. Whatever it is, alternative energy is the best source